When you go no contact, what you remove is not conversation, not affection, not even conflict. You remove control. And for a narcissistic personality, control is not a preference. It is psychological oxygen. Each day without access to you becomes a quiet but profound threat to the internal structure she relies on to feel real, stable, and significant. This is why silence affects her so deeply. It disrupts the illusion that she is central, necessary, and authoritative in your inner world. From a psychological perspective, narcissism is built on external regulation. The self is not anchored internally. It must be constantly confirmed from the outside. When you disappear, that feedback loop collapses. She may appear calm or dismissive on the surface, but internally there is agitation. The mind begins circling the same question again and again: how do I regain influence? Not necessarily love, influence, power, relevance. She will revisit memories, not to understand them, but to reinterpret them in a way that restores her dominance. In these inner rehearsals, she is either the misunderstood hero or the one who was wronged, rarely the equal participant. Your decision to withdraw forces a confrontation with something deeply uncomfortable, the realization that another human being can choose autonomy over appeasement. This is where the anger often begins, not explosive rage, but a cold, simmering resistance to reality. Jung spoke of the ego's desperate attempts to protect itself when its narrative is threatened. No contact is precisely such a threat. It says, without words, you do not define me. And that message lands every single day. What makes this dynamic powerful is that you are doing nothing. You are not persuading, explaining, or defending. You are simply no longer available for manipulation. And that absence becomes louder than any argument ever could. The reflection here is simple but demanding. If silence unsettles someone, it is because they were feeding on your presence. Maintain no contact not as punishment, but as a commitment to your psychological sovereignty, because the moment you stop managing someone else's ego is the moment you begin reclaiming your own life. After the initial shock of losing control, a deeper pattern begins to surface, an emotional oscillation that plays out day after day. On some days she is consumed by anger. On others she collapses into a sense of victimhood. What's important to understand is that neither state is stable, and neither is rooted in self-reflection. They are psychological defenses, alternating roles the ego adopts to avoid responsibility. Anger serves a very specific function. It allows her to preserve a sense of superiority. If she can frame you as cruel, disloyal, or ungrateful, then your decision to go no contact becomes an offense rather than a boundary. In this version of the story, she is not rejected, she is provoked. This protects her self-image and keeps shame at a distance. Jung would describe this as projection. The disowned parts of the psyche are pushed outward and assigned to someone else. You become the container for everything she cannot tolerate in herself. But anger is exhausting. It requires constant fuel, and when it fades, it often gives way to victimhood. Suddenly, she is the one who is abandoned, misunderstood, or emotionally neglected. This shift is not growth, it is compensation. The victim identity allows her to reclaim moral authority without confronting her own behavior. In both roles, persecutor and victim, she remains at the center of the narrative. What's striking is how fluidly she moves between these positions, sometimes within the same day. This emotional cycling is an attempt to stabilize a fragile inner world. There is no grounded sense of self beneath it, only reactions. Your silence removes the external anchor she depended on to regulate her emotions. The psyche swings between extremes in an effort to regain balance. And here is the quiet truth that often goes unnoticed. You are no longer participating in this cycle. By stepping away, you refuse both roles, villain and savior. You are no longer available to absorb blame or provide reassurance. This is deeply destabilizing for someone whose identity depends on emotional entanglement. The reflection to sit with is this: when someone must cast you as either enemy or rescuer, they are telling you they cannot see you as a separate self. The act, then, is not to correct their story, but to exit it entirely, because real psychological freedom begins the moment you stop auditioning for a role in someone else's unresolved inner drama. As the emotional cycling continues, another behavior quietly takes shape: observation without presence. No contact removes direct access, but it does not eliminate the need to know. In fact, it often intensifies it. When a narcissistic woman can no longer engage with you openly, she begins to monitor from a distance. This is not curiosity in the healthy sense. It is an attempt to regain psychological orientation in a world where she is no longer central. From a Jungian lens, this is the ego searching for lost mirrors. The narcissistic psyche relies on reflection, on seeing itself confirmed in the reactions of others. When you vanish, the psyche experiences a kind of vertigo. Surveillance becomes a way to steady that imbalance. Social media, mutual acquaintances, imagined scenarios, these become substitute points of contact. She is not looking for facts as much as she is looking for emotional evidence that she still matters. What's revealing is that this monitoring often occurs alongside a posture of indifference. Outwardly, she may claim she has moved on, that you are irrelevant, yet internally, your perceived happiness or suffering carries disproportionate weight. If you appear to be thriving, it can provoke envy or disbelief. If you appear diminished, it may restore a sense of superiority. In both cases, your life is still being used to regulate her inner state. This behavior also serves another function. It allows her to avoid true separation. To fully accept no contact would mean confronting loss, limitation, and the autonomy of another person. Surveillance creates the illusion of connection without vulnerability. She can observe without risking rejection, imagine without being challenged, and remain psychologically entangled while appearing detached. What you must recognize is that this is not intimacy. It is attachment without reciprocity. And it persists only if you continue to provide access, even indirectly. Every boundary you leave porous becomes an invitation for the psyche to linger where it no longer belongs. The closing insight is this: when someone watches from the shadows, it is because they cannot tolerate the reality of your independence. True freedom is not only walking away, but closing the internal doors as well, because the moment you stop being available for observation is the moment you stop being an object in someone else's unfinished inner work. When surveillance no longer provides enough emotional regulation, the psyche seeks substitution. Attention, after all, is not optional for a narcissistic structure. It is essential. So when you are no longer available as a source, she turns outward, often quickly, to fill the sudden vacuum. New admirers, heightened social activity, exaggerated displays of happiness. These are not signs of healing. They are signs of compensation. From a psychological standpoint, this is the ego attempting to stabilize itself through quantity rather than depth. Jung would describe this as an inflation of persona. The outer image is intensified to conceal inner fragmentation. Each interaction becomes a small dose of reassurance, a temporary confirmation that she is still desirable, still powerful, still intact. But because the reassurance is external, it never lasts. The relief fades quickly, requiring repetition, more attention, more validation, more noise. This is why these substitutes often feel performative. The joy is loud, the confidence overstated, the connections shallow but numerous. What is being avoided is silence, the very silence you created by going no contact. That silence forces inward confrontation, and inward confrontation threatens the fragile self-image. So instead, energy is poured outward. Wow! What often goes unnoticed is that this behavior is not directed at you, but because of you. Your absence revealed a dependency she may not consciously recognize, but her psyche responds nonetheless. Each new source of attention is unconsciously measured against the one who left. not because you were ideal, but because you were familiar. You were part of the structure that helped regulate her sense of self.
This can be confusing. It may look like replacement.
Like being erased. But psychologically, it is the opposite. The need to replace reveals the inability to integrate loss. Someone who is whole does not need to prove wholeness. The essential insight here is this: when someone rushes to fill a void, it is because they do not know how to sit with it. Your task is not to interpret their behavior, but to remain grounded in your own. Let their substitutes reveal their inner hunger, while you commit to cultivating something far rarer, an identity that does not require an audience to feel real. As the substitutes lose their potency, a quieter but more calculated process begins. She starts to imagine re-entry, not always in action, but almost always in thought. Messages are drafted and deleted in the mind long before they ever reach a screen. Apologies are rehearsed, not as expressions of insight, but as instruments. Guilt is weighed, nostalgia considered, emergencies imagined. Each scenario is tested internally for one thing. Will this reopen the door? From a Jungian perspective, this is the ego negotiating with reality rather than accepting it. No contact represents a boundary that cannot be controlled directly, so the psyche turns to indirect strategies. The sigh of re-engagement becomes a way to soothe anxiety. Even if she never sends the message, the planning itself restores a temporary sense of agency. It allows her to feel that the situation is not final, that she still has options. What's important to grasp is that these imagined approaches are rarely about reconciliation in the true sense. They are about restoring access. The content of the message may change, warm one day, cold the next, but the underlying intention remains consistent, to test whether she still has emotional leverage. This is why the timing can feel uncanny. It often comes when you are stabilizing, when your silence has become steady rather than reactive. Psychologically, that consistency signals loss of control, and the psyche responds. There is also an internal conflict at play. Part of her resists reaching out because doing so risks rejection. Another part cannot tolerate irrelevance. The result is a daily inner tug-of-war, where imagined contact replaces actual contact. This liminal space, neither connected nor fully separated, allows her to avoid the finality of your boundary. For you, the danger is not the message itself, but the meaning you assign to it. When contact finally comes, it may feel significant, even fated. But significance does not equal sincerity. Jung warned that what is not made conscious will be experienced as fate. Understanding the pattern removes its power. So the reflection to hold is this: when someone circles your boundary in thought or action, it is not proof of connection, it is proof of dependence. Your responsibility is not to respond, explain, or reopen. It is to remain aligned with the choice you made when you chose your self. Because the moment you stop interpreting their return as validation is the moment their strategies lose their grip on your life. As time passes and your no contact remains consistent, something irreversible begins to occur. Not dramatically, not visibly, but structurally. Her internal narrative starts to weaken. Narcissistic dynamics survive on reaction. They require emotional friction, resistance, engagement. Your silence offers none of that. And without it, the illusion she maintained about herself, about you, and about the relationship begins to lose coherence. Jung spoke of the persona as a mask shaped and reinforced through interaction. When interaction ends, the mask has nothing to reflect it back. This is the quiet crisis no contact produces. Each day you do not respond, argue, explain, or defend, the fantasy of control becomes harder to sustain. She may still cling to old interpretations, but they no longer feel convincing. Reality keeps interrupting the story. What she is slowly forced to confront is limitation. The fact that not everyone can be persuaded, managed, or pulled back into orbit. This is profoundly destabilizing for a psyche built on omnipotence. The world begins to feel less responsive, less obedient. And because narcissism lacks a stable inner core, the absence of external validation exposes an uncomfortable truth without an audience. The performance collapses. This does not always lead to insight. Often it leads to bitterness, denial, or emotional withdrawal. But the shift has already occurred. Your silence has introduced a fact that cannot be undone. She does not have access to you. And access, once lost and consistently denied, changes the psychological equation permanently. For you, this phase can feel anticlimactic. There is no dramatic closure, no apology that arrives to confirm your worth. But this is precisely the point. Growth rarely announces itself. It stabilizes quietly. You begin to feel less reactive, more grounded. The mental space once occupied by anticipation or analysis starts to clear. Your nervous system learns a new rhythm, one not dictated by someone else's volatility. This is where no contact reveals its true purpose. It was never about changing her. It was about removing yourself from an illusion that required your participation to survive. So the final reflection is this: consistency is not passive, it is decisive. When you choose silence and sustain it, you are not disappearing, you are declaring independence. And the most powerful transformation is not when someone finally understands you, but when you no longer need them to.